Is 21 psi on my stock GTI turbo equivalent to 21 psi on an upgraded turbo? This is a good
That's a
question.
good one, and definitely not. Absolutely not. So, boost pressure in an engine is an interesting thing. It's actually a measurement of the restriction of the air getting through the motor. So the motor is just a big air pump, and the turbo is, the last line in that pump. And to push 21 psi through a stock turbo requires, or is going to generate a certain amount of pressure because it's a little turbo with smaller orifices, smaller turbines. Um, so when you take that plug off the end of the motor, put a much bigger turbo there with a bigger orifice, bigger turbine, bigger housings, bigger everything. It's going to take a lot more pressure to get, or a lot more airflow to get to that 21 psi of pressure going through the motor again. So the yeah, the amount of back pressure in an exhaust manifold is a very substantial thing,
Yeah.
and it comes into play pretty dramatically on overall boost pressure.
So I'll get a little bit more granular. So 21 psi on the stock turbo and 21 psi on a KO4 aren't going to be that different, right? They're going to be pretty
Yeah,
similar,
right. Yeah, it depends how big we're
right?
talking here.
But if you're talking about 21 psi on kind of a stock turbo or other turbos that are similar in size, the KO4 is a little bit bigger, but it's not a lot bigger. Now, if you're talking about 21 psi in say like a GT35R or a GT42 RS, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so here's a good analogy, and here's where I really learned about this is we used to build. I don't know pictures, but if you check out our 10th anniversary shirt, it has all the project cars on it, and
The ADTQ right
uh,
here.
well, ATQ right here. This is where I learned. So um, when I built ADTQ, I started with a stock K26 turbo. That's like a 250 horsepower turbo, and I maxed the boost out on that like around 25 psi, and I made, I don't know, 250 wheel. Over the years, I continued to put bigger and bigger turbos on that motor. At one point, I ended up with a GT42 RS on it. So I made like 250 wheel on a K26 at 25 psi, 25 psi on the GT42 RS, same motor, same basic everything. Power went from like 250 wheel to like 600 wheel, same boost pressure. So why is that? Well, because the inducer in the nozzle on the K26 was about a half inch. So I don't know if you can see, but all the air in the motor went through a nozzle about half inch in diameter. And that's how a turbo produces boost pressure. Is it focuses all the exhaust output of the motor in a continuously reducing radius housing, which is the turbine housing, and the AR ratio plays into that. And you end up with a very tiny nozzle where a lot of air is being crammed into a very small place, and this nozzle of high pressure, high velocity exhaust hits the turbine wheel. That spins the turbine wheel very fast, which spins the compressor wheel, which creates this amazing vortex of pressure and flow. Now, the GT42 RS, I was running like a the K26 had a dot six AR. Like
6.4, 6.3. I think.
yeah, that's Garrett, but
No, sure.
it was a number six housing, so it's a dot 60 AR, and the 42 RS had like a 1.2 AR. So all the engine output for the 42 RS was going through about like a 1 to 1.5 inch nozzle. Now, that meant the turbo was way laggier. The K26's entire power curve was below the point when the 42 RS even started to spool up. But the amount of air that was able to flow through the motor at that higher pressure level was much higher because the holes were bigger for the stuff to go through. So there's these compromises where um, you're going to need more flow to get to the same pressure, but uh, boost when you're looking at your boost gauge, you're only seeing one thing. You're seeing a static pressure. But what's happening inside the engine is static pressure that's moving through the motor. And so that's the difference. And that's, when Nate's explaining the resistance. If you have that small AR, you're going to build 25 psi very easily. The static pressure will be the same, but the net flow of the pressurized air going through the system will be much lower than with a much bigger turbo. So I think this is an important thing to keep in mind. Boost pressure and flow are not the same between different turbos. But turbos that are very similar, it's the same. So you really have to go to a much bigger turbo to see that difference.
Somebody replied the difference in 21 psi is efficiency and heat. That's a part of it, but it is not.
No, it's the flow that explains the bulk of it. The efficiency is
That would be
is a part of it.
to changing like Javad said within like the same family of turbo. If you're changing like a compressor wheel or you're changing some smaller aspects of it, but when you're going like a full paradigm shift of like orders of magnitude larger housings and orifices that play a way bigger part than some efficiency.
So think about it this way: you have two pipes. You have one pipe that's 1 inch in diameter. You have one pipe that's 5 inches in diameter. You need to move water through both, and so you put 5 psi of water pressure in each pipe. Which pipe is going to flow more? Like if you're comparing 5 psi between a 1 inch pipe and a 1 1/4 inch pipe, the flow difference isn't going to be that big. But between a 1 inch and a 5 inch, it's going to be massive. So the pressure is only one variable. It's the net flow through the system that's the other variable, and that's what people miss when they only think about boost pressure. So these bigger turbos flow more air. So your stock turbo flows 25 pounds of air, and a 42 RS flows 900, or I'm sorry, 90. So it's 4 times more flow. So if it's producing the same pressure, it has the ability to flow 4 times more air at that pressure, and that's where the big difference comes from. I would recommend anyone out there who's interested in turbos to read Corky Bell's book. What was it called?
Just had it.
Maximum Boost. Read that book. It's old and it's good. It came out. I was just getting into cars when it hit the market. It was like in the Maximum Boost. It's a good book. If you understand everything in that book, you will know more than 99% of the people out there in this community. There's a lot of misunderstandings around turbos and pressure, but and then this is the other reason why we always talk about like the most boost isn't always the best. There's the right amount of boost that's the best. And if you're trying to push a smaller device to a higher pressure that it's not suited for, then it's not going to do well. And I think the ultimate example was when we did the time attack car. We built a same motor. We would just swap different turbos on and off the exhaust manifold. We had a 35R setup that would do about 500 wheel and about 30 pounds of boost. And then we'd throw the 45R on it. And on the wastegate pressure at like 10 psi, it would put down like 650 to 700 wheel. Just like the lowest boost we could run.
Yep.
And it's just because the entire 35R could fit inside the 45R. The flow, we went from 600 CFM to like 1300 CFM. So that's why the power's there. This is a great topic. If you guys want to talk about it more, put in some questions for next week. We'll keep going. There's a lot to talk about there. And this is a really tough concept, I think, for a lot of people to understand. And it's tough to explain it, too.
It's really tough to explain.
Trying my best.
It's counterintuitive. It's like more boost is more power, but more boost is, again, the measurement of the restriction of the air getting through the motor. So it's a tough one.
An exact corollary or analogy is the pipe analogy. 5 psi in a 1 inch pipe versus 5 psi in a 5 inch pipe. What do you think is going to happen?
How much work can you do with that water coming through or whatever's coming out of it? So